hands behind your back. Now, don't make me say it twice. Those were the first words Officer Cole Bennett ever said to Marcus Sterling, and he said them on Marcus's own driveway at 8:12. On a Sunday morning, while Marcus was holding a rolled-up newspaper and a cup of coffee that was still too hot to drink. Before we get to what happened after that sentence, before the armored trucks, before the man in the orange jumpsuit, before a courtroom in Charlotte went dead silent, you need to see the 40 minutes that came before it. Because the story isn't really about a bad arrest. It's about what happens when a man convinced of his own righteousness finally meets someone he cannot bully, cannot outshout, and cannot outlie. Ridgemont Estates sits 18 miles north of downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, tucked behind a stone gate with a fountain that hasn't worked properly since 2019. The houses average 5,000 square feet. The lawns are cut on Tuesdays. On a July morning, the air smells like cut grass, chlorine from somebody's pool, and the particular quiet of old money. A silence so complete you can hear a garage door 2 streets over. Marcus Sterling stood at the end of his driveway at number 118 Blackwood Lane, wearing a faded gray t-shirt from a 10K he ran in 2011, cargo shorts, and rubber sandals that had given up trying to look presentable years ago. He was 57 years old. Built like a man who still did 400 push-ups a week out of habit rather than vanity, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He had a mug of coffee in one hand. Black, no sugar, from a chipped mug that said World's Oakest Golfer, a gift from his daughter, and the Sunday paper tucked under his arm. In his front shirt pocket, where most men might keep a pen, Marcus carried a small square of folded black velvet. Inside, it was a badge, not his own, his father's. Willie Sterling had worn badge number 114 for the Charlotte Police Department for 19 years, through a decade when very few black officers wore any badge in that city at all. In 1988, Willie Sterling walked into a convenience store robbery in progress on Beatty's Ford Road and talked the gunman into putting the weapon down without a single shot fired. Command promised him a commendation ceremony. It never happened. 6 months later, he was passed over for sergeant for the 3rd time, and 18 months after that, responding alone to a call that should have had backup, he was shot and killed by a man who was never identified because the department's own radio logs from that shift were later found to be incomplete. Marcus had been 11 years old. He kept the badge in his pocket every day of his adult life, not as a decoration, but as a question he asked himself every morning. What kind of system will I build so this doesn't happen to somebody else's son? That question was the entire reason Marcus Sterling now held the title of director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He didn't talk about the job at dinner parties. He didn't drive anything that announced itself. His SUV in the garage was a 5-year-old Ford Explorer with 61,000 miles on it. His neighbors on Blackwood Lane knew him as the quiet guy who travels a lot, and most of them assumed he worked in finance because nobody imagines the head of the FBI mowing his own lawn in rubber sandals. That was exactly how Marcus liked it. He had spent 3 decades in rooms where people either performed deference or performed suspicion the second they learned his title. And Sunday mornings were the only hours of his week when nobody performed anything at all. He got his paper. He drank his coffee. He said good morning to Denise from 2 doors down, who was walking her elderly beagle, and to the Kowalski twins riding their bikes in wobbly circles at the end of the cul-de-sac. At 8 and 9 that morning, a Ridgemont Hills patrol cruiser turned on to Blackwood Lane, moving slower than it needed to. Officer Cole Bennett was 29 years old and had been with the department for 4 years, the last 2 of which he had spent quietly furious that he was still working patrol instead of narcotics. He kept a laminated printout in his glove box listing every arrest he'd made that had led to a felony charge updated by hand, because he genuinely believed, that the number was the only thing standing between him and the promotion he deserved. He wasn't stupid. He was worse than stupid. He was convinced he was one of the good ones, the kind of cop who kept dangerous people out of nice neighborhoods, and that conviction had calcified into something that no longer needed evidence to operate. Riding next to him was Officer Ray Dawson, 51, 19 months from his pension. A man who had learned a long time ago that saying "let it go" Cole 3 times in a shift was easier than saying it once and getting into an argument that would follow him into the break room for a week. "Would you look at that?" Cole said, easing off the gas as the cruiser rolled past number 118. He nodded toward the man standing at the end of the driveway in a faded t-shirt and sandals. "Guy's just standing there in the Sterling place." "That's a $2.8 million lot, Ray." "That's Mr. Sterling," Ray said, not even looking up from his coffee. "Lives there. Quiet guy. You know him?" "I know the house has never called us once in 6 years. That's usually a decent sign." Cole was already pulling to the curb. "Doesn't look like him to me." Ray felt the first small twist of dread in his stomach, the kind he'd learned to recognize, and, to his own lasting shame, the kind he had learned to ignore. Cole stepped out of the cruiser, sunglasses on, chest slightly forward in the particular posture of a man rehearsing his own authority, before he's even opened his mouth. He walked up the driveway with the unhurried, proprietary stride of someone who has decided, before a single word is exchanged, exactly how this conversation is going to end. Marcus watched him come. He had spent 31 years reading body language for a living, in interrogation rooms, in hostage negotiations, in congressional hearings where a senator's twitching jaw told him more than an hour of testimony. He read Cole Bennett in about 4 seconds, insecure, performing for an audience of one, himself, looking for a headline, not a threat. "Morning," Marcus said easily, lifting his coffee mug slightly in greeting. "The way you'd greet anyone on your own street." "I need to see some ID," Cole said. "No greeting, no preamble." "I live here," Marcus said. "Number 118. I don't carry a wallet out to get the paper." "That's convenient." Cole's mouth curled into something that wanted to be a smile and landed somewhere closer to a sneer. "You got a name to go with that story. Marcus Sterling. And you're telling me you own this house?" "I am." Cole let out a short laugh through his nose, the kind designed to be heard by his partner back at the cruiser. "Sure you do. Turn around. Hands behind your back now. Don't make me say it twice." Marcus did not move. Not out of defiance. Out of 30 years of professional instinct that told him resisting physically was the one mistake that could turn a bad situation into a fatal one. He set his coffee mug down carefully on the low brick wall, bordering his own flower beds, moved with a stillness that made the moment feel somehow louder than shouting would have. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice level, almost gentle, "I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing right now. You have no report of a crime. You have no description matching a suspect. You have a man standing on his own property holding a newspaper. I am going to ask you one time to radio your dispatcher and run the address before this goes any further." I take orders from a suspect," Cole snapped, and grabbed Marcus's wrist. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a quiet street when something happens that everyone half expects and nobody wants to see. Denise, 2 doors down, stopped walking her beagle. The dog sat. Nobody spoke. The only sound on Blackwood Lane was the metallic double click of handcuffs closing around the wrists of the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Standing in his own driveway, in his rubber sandals, on a Sunday morning in July. "You are making a mistake you will not be able to undo," Marcus said quietly, as Cole gripped his upper arm and steered him toward the cruiser. "I am going to give you exactly one more opportunity to check my identification before I am placed in that vehicle. Save it for booking." Ray Dawson stood by the open cruiser door, coffee forgotten on the roof of the car, watching his partner shove a 57-year-old man's head down through the frame of the back seat with more force than the moment required. Ray opened his mouth. He almost said something. What came out instead was nothing. Just a long breath through his nose, and a decision, made in half a second, that he would regret for the rest of his career. He decided it wasn't his fight. The back seat of a patrol cruiser is not built for comfort. It's built for liability. Hard-molded plastic, a scuffed plexiglass divider, the ghost smell of 100 fast food bags, and one memorable incident involving a very drunk bachelor party. Marcus sat with his wrists cuffed too tight behind him, his back straight, his eyes fixed on the back of Cole Bennett's head through the divider. He was not afraid. He'd stopped being afraid of aggressive, undertrained men with badges a long time ago. Somewhere around his second decade, running federal task forces that existed specifically to catch officers exactly like this one. What he felt instead was colder and more exact, a slow, methodical cataloging of every violation happening in real time. No probable cause, no verification of identity before use of force, no Miranda warning. Excessive force applied to a fully compliant subject. He wasn't building a case out of anger. He was building it out of habit, the same habit that had made him extraordinarily good at his job for 3 decades. "I caught this one snooping around the Sterling property," Cole was saying into his radio, loud enough to be sure his prisoner heard every word. "Says his name's Marcus Sterling. Says he owns the place. No ID, no story that checks out, bringing him in for trespassing, obstruction, and failure to identify." Through the plexiglass, Marcus watched Ray Dawson glance into the rearview mirror. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. Ray looked away first. Marcus closed his eyes and did the only thing he allowed himself in that moment. He thought of his father's badge, still folded in the velvet square in his shirt pocket, pressed now against his chest by the seatbelt. Cole hadn't bothered to check. 19 years, badge 114, a commendation ceremony that never happened. Marcus had built his entire career trying to make sure no one else's family carried that particular kind of silence. And here he was, cuffed in the back of a cruiser, 18 miles from a headquarters where 400 agents answered directly to him. Because a 29-year-old officer had looked at a black man in cargo shorts standing in front of a nice house and decided he already knew the whole story. The Ridgemont Hills police station was a squat brick building from the 1970s that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Sergeant Paul Whitfield, 52 years old, 26 years on the job, sat at the booking desk, chewing the same piece of gum he'd started 40 minutes ago, half watching a muted television replaying last night's baseball highlights. "Got a live one," Sarge, Cole announced, steering Marcus toward the desk with a hand still clamped on his upper arm. "Trespassing at the Sterling residence on Blackwood. No ID. Story doesn't hold up." Whitfield looked up. He took in the man standing in front of his desk. Cuffed hands now brought forward at Whitfield's insistence. Wrists showing raw red welts from cuffs, applied too tight. A gray t-shirt, sandals, and an expression of such total, unhurried composure that it made the hair on the back of Whitfield's neck stand up before he understood why. Criminals protest. They cry. They bargain. They lie fast and loud. This man had said nothing since walking through the door except, quietly, "I'd like my phone call, Sergeant, and I'd suggest you preserve the dash camera footage from the arresting vehicle before anyone has the chance to review it." Whitfield stopped chewing. "Empty your pockets," he said, more out of procedure than conviction. Marcus, hands now in front of him, reached into his shirt pocket and placed 2 things on the counter: a single brass house key and a small square of folded black velvet. He did not open the velvet. He simply set it down, gently, the way you set down something that matters. "That's it?" Cole said, loud enough for the whole booking area to hear. "No wallet, no phone. Who walks out of a 6-figure house with nothing on him? Tells you everything." A man getting his newspaper, Marcus said, and for the first time, he looked directly at Cole. Officer, I am going to say this once, and I would like you to remember that I said it. You have made an assumption, and that assumption is about to cost you considerably more than you understand right now. I am requesting my phone call. Whitfield slid the desk phone across the counter without a word. Something about the request, preserve the footage, had already started a small, cold engine of dread turning over in his chest. Marcus dialed 12 digits from memory. He didn't need to look them up. He'd had this particular number memorized for 9 years. Marsh, a voice answered on the second ring. Victor, it's Marcus. There was a fraction of a second pause on the other end. The particular silence of someone recalibrating an entire morning in half a heartbeat. Sir, you're on an open line. I am aware. Victor, I am currently in custody at the Ridgemont Hills Police Department outside Charlotte. I was detained on my own property without cause, restrained with excessive force, and denied my rights during the arrest. I need the Charlotte field office to respond. I need Diana Reyes on scene personally, and I need someone from OPR documenting everything from the moment they arrive. The voice on the other end did not ask if this was a joke. Victor Marsh, Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, had worked beside Marcus Sterling for 11 years, and he had never once heard that particular, calm, flat register in his director's voice used for anything other than a situation about to become very serious for someone. On our way, Marsh said. Are you hurt? I am uninjured. I want this handled correctly, Victor. Not quickly. Correctly. Marcus hung up the phone and slid it back across the counter. He looked at Cole Bennett, who was standing with his thumbs hooked into his duty belt, still riding the high of what he believed was a clean pickup. Somebody's going to need a very good lawyer today, Marcus said quietly, and it isn't going to be me. They put him in holding cell 2, a 10-by-8 concrete box with a steel bench bolted to the wall and a smell of bleach that couldn't quite cover 40 years of whatever it was covering. Marcus sat with his back straight, hands folded in his lap, and waited with the patience of a man who had once sat across a table from a hostage-taker for 11 hours without breaking eye contact. Out at the booking desk, Whitfield had pulled up the county property database, typed in 118 Blackwood Lane, and gone very quiet. Owner, Marcus A. Sterling. He tried the name in the National Law Enforcement Index next, purely out of habit, and the screen returned a red banner. Restricted, clearance level 9 required. Contact federal liaison. Whitfield's hand was not steady when he opened a browser and typed the name into a search engine instead. The first result was a government page. A photograph, the same man now sitting in cell 2, except in a navy suit instead of a faded t-shirt, and beneath it, 5 words that made Sergeant Paul Whitfield feel the floor tilt slightly under his chair. Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Cole, Whitfield said. His voice didn't sound like his own voice. Cole, come here. He's still running his mouth back there, Cole said, ambling over, still riding high. Talking about lawyers and footage like he's. Look at the screen. Cole looked. He read the name. He read the title. The coffee cup in his hand slipped from his fingers and shattered against the linoleum. And for 3 full seconds, nobody in the booking area said anything at all. Ray Dawson, standing by the water cooler, felt something cold drop straight through his chest. That's not, Cole started. That is exactly who it is, Whitfield said. And for a moment his career flashed in front of him with terrible clarity. 26 years, a pension 11 months from vesting, a wife who had already started planning the retirement trip to Savannah. You arrested the director of the FBI in his own driveway. Nobody moved to open the cell. Nobody had the nerve. 12 minutes later, they didn't need to. The rumble started as a vibration under the floor tiles before it became a sound, a heavy, synchronized engine roar that had nothing in common with the high whine of a patrol siren. Ray Dawson, closest to the front windows, watched the morning light outside the station darken, as vehicle after vehicle rolled into position across the street. 6 black SUVs forming an unbroken wall, and behind them, 2 armored tactical trucks the color of wet slate. Doors opened in unison. More than 30 agents in full tactical gear poured out onto the pavement with a silence that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. Vests marked FBI in bold yellow block letters, carbines held low and ready. 2 agents already moving toward rooftop positions across the street. Perimeter secure. All exits covered, a voice called through a bullhorn. The station's front doors were pulled open, and a dozen agents fanned into the lobby with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from doing this exact maneuver in training 100 times and hoping never to do it for real. Federal agents, hands where we can see them, nobody moves. Cole Bennett's hands went up so fast he nearly hit himself in the face. 2 agents had his duty belt, his weapon, and his badge off him in 11 seconds, tossed onto the counter like evidence, which, as it happened, they now were. Through the wall of agents strode a woman in her late 40s with silver-streaked, dark hair pulled back tight, moving like she had personally decided gravity didn't apply to her that morning. Special Agent in charge Diana Reyes had been Marcus Sterling's colleague for 14 years, and the fury radiating off her was the kind that made even the SWAT operators give her a wide berth. "Where?" she said to Whitfield, not raising her voice, which was somehow worse than if she had, is Director Sterling. "Cell 2, Whitfield stammered. He's fine, ma'am. He's completely unharmed." This was a keys, Reyes said, and Whitfield's trembling hand produced them before she'd finished the word. She walked the narrow cinderblock hallway herself, agents parting for her without needing to be told, and stopped in front of Cell 2. Marcus was sitting exactly where they'd left him. Spine straight, hands folded, badge-shaped bulge of velvet still tucked in his shirt pocket, where no one had thought to take it from him. "Director," Reyes said, unlocking the cell. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine, Diana." Marcus stood, smoothing the front of his faded t-shirt, as though it were a suit jacket. "Thank you for the response time." "That's better than the drill." "With respect, sir, I don't care about the drill time right now." Reyes's jaw was tight. "What happened? What happened?" Marcus said, stepping out of the cell and starting back down the hallway toward the booking area, is a textbook demonstration of exactly the kind of pattern this bureau has spent 3 years trying to root out of departments across this country. Let's go see how deep it runs here. The booking area had gone completely still by the time Marcus walked back in. Agents held the perimeter. Whitfield and Ray Dawson stood frozen behind the desk, and in the center of the room, stripped of his weapon, his badge, and every ounce of the swagger he'd walked in with an hour earlier, stood Cole Bennett, looking, for the first time all morning, like exactly what he was. A frightened young man who had picked a fight with something far larger than himself and hadn't understood it until it was standing directly in front of him. Marcus stopped 2 feet away. Cole couldn't meet his eyes. "Sir, Director, I didn't know." "You didn't know," Marcus repeated, and his voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made it land harder than shouting ever could have. "That's the entire problem, Officer Bennett. You didn't know my name. You didn't know if I owned that house. You didn't run the address before you put your hands on me. You didn't ask a single question you didn't already believe you knew the answer to. You looked at a black man in old clothes, standing in front of a nice house, and your assumption did the rest of the thinking for you." He let that sit in the silence of the room for exactly 3 seconds. "You do not own the law," Marcus said. "You were loaned a very small piece of it, and today you used it to hurt someone for the crime of getting his newspaper. That loan has just been called in." He turned to Reyes. "Diana, I want the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division on the phone within the hour." I want every arrest this officer has made in the last 4 years pulled and audited. Everyone. And I want to know why a sergeant with 26 years of experience didn't check a license plate before his officer put a suspect in cuffs. Yes, Director. Marcus looked at Cole one final time. You thought you were making the arrest of your career this morning, he said. You were right. You just didn't understand who you were arresting. Chief Robert Hale was on the 14th hole at the Ridgemont Country Club, 3 strokes under par, and feeling very good about his Sunday when his phone rang so many times in a row that his golf partner finally told him to just answer the damn thing. Bobby, turn on a television. Any television. Mayor Cynthia Boyd said the second he picked up, her voice cracking in a register he'd never heard from her before. Your department just arrested the director of the FBI. There are 3 news helicopters over your station right now. Get down there before the federal government dissolves our entire city charter. Hale broke every speed limit getting back into town. When he finally pushed through the double glass doors of his own station, the scene inside stopped him cold. Agents in tactical gear still holding position at every exit. Deputy Director Victor Marsh, standing at the booking counter with a phone against his ear and an expression carved from granite, and Cole Bennett sitting in a plastic chair against the wall, hands cuffed now, federal cuffs, not his own department's, head down, shoulders shaking. Who is in charge here? Marsh asked, without looking up. I am, Chief Robert Hale. Where is Director Sterling? I need to apologize personally. He has no interest in your apology, Chief. Marsh said, snapping his phone shut. He's interested in accountability. As of this moment, your department is under a full federal review, starting with this officer's arrest history. Hale turned to Whitfield, his face draining of color. Tell me exactly what happened. All of it. Whitfield, unable to meet his chief's eyes, laid it out in flat, mechanical sentences. The driveway, the cuffs, the lack of any check on the address, the phone call, the 14 minutes between arrest and armored trucks blocking the street. We didn't run the name until he was already in the cage, Chief. He was getting his paper. Hale's fury landed on Cole Bennett like a physical blow. Stand up, he said, and when Cole didn't move fast enough, he said it again, louder. Stand up, Bennett. You are suspended without pay, effective this second, pending termination. And if the union thinks they're fighting me on this, they can explain to the cameras outside why they're defending an officer who assaulted a sitting FBI director on his own property. The union won't be an issue, Marsh said, stepping forward, and nodded to 2 waiting agents. Cole Bennett, you are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for deprivation of rights under the law, in violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. I'm a cop, Cole said, his voice cracking, backing into the wall as the federal cuffs came out. You can't just, I'm a police officer. Not anymore, Marsh said, and the cuffs closed with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire booking area. Put him in cell 2, he added, to the agents flanking him. Same one he put the director in. Let him sit on the same bench. Cole Bennett was still sobbing when the heavy door slammed shut behind him. 72 hours later, the Ridgemont Hills station had been quietly converted into a temporary federal command post. Folding tables, laptops, bankers' boxes of case files stacked 3 deep against the wall that used to hold a bulletin board of missing pet flyers. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division had sent down a senior investigator named Agent Patricia Lang, a soft-spoken woman with a reputation for the kind of patient, methodical work that terrified guilty men far more than shouting ever would. She didn't have to dig very deep. Officer Dawson, she said, sliding a thin folder across the table to where Ray Dawson sat, looking a decade older than he had 4 days earlier. He had already surrendered his badge voluntarily, hoping cooperation might buy him something. A lighter charge, a chance to keep his pension, or maybe just the ability to sleep again. We've spent the last 3 days going through Officer Bennett's stop records. His rate of cash seizures during routine traffic stops is roughly 4 times the department average. Can you explain that to me? Ray rubbed his face with both hands. He had a system, he said quietly. If the driver was black or Hispanic and had cash on them, didn't matter how much, $200, $2,000, he'd claim he smelled something, search the car, and take it under asset forfeiture. Told them, if they fought it, he'd file a felony distribution charge that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Most people just let it go. Nobody wants that fight. And the money? Lang asked. According to the property room logs, Officer Bennett has logged just over $340,000 in cash seizures over the past 4 years. She turned a page. Our forensic accountants have traced only $52,000 of that into the department's actual forfeiture account. Ray's head came up slowly. That's not possible. It's very possible, Lang said. It means Officer Bennett wasn't simply a man with a troubling pattern of profiling. He was operating a theft scheme using a badge as cover, and the arrest of Director Sterling wasn't an isolated act of prejudice. It was the same instinct that had been paying his bills for 4 years. See a person who looks like an easy target, assume there's cash involved, take what you can, and count on the fact that no one will believe the victim over the officer. The twist rippled through the temporary command post, like a second detonation. This hadn't just been a catastrophic case of racial profiling. It had been an attempted shakedown. Cole Bennett looking at a black man outside a multi-million-dollar house and, assuming, in the half-second it took to swing the cruiser toward the curb, that he'd either caught a burglar or found himself a very lucrative and very intimidated mark. He had run his usual playbook on the single worst possible person on the planet to try it on. Down at the federal detention facility outside Charlotte, Cole Bennett sat across a metal table from Agent Lang in an orange jumpsuit, dark circles carved under his eyes, looking nothing at all like the man who had swaggered up a driveway on Blackwood Lane 4 days earlier. My attorney thinks we can work out a plea on the civil rights charge, he said, his voice hoarse. I'll resign. I'll never wear a badge again. I just want to avoid federal prison. Mr. Bennett, Lang said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. The civil rights charge is the smallest problem you have right now. She opened the folder in front of her. We found $85,000 in cash, hidden behind drywall, in your garage. We found a storage unit, registered under your mother's name, containing another $61,000. We have sworn statements from 16 separate individuals describing the exact same threat, the exact same fabricated probable cause, and the exact same outcome. Their money gone and a felony charge that was never filed because they were too afraid to fight it. Cole had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of that sentence. You believed you were untouchable because of the badge, Lang continued, closing the folder. You picked people you assumed had no power to push back, and then you got greedy and arrogant, and you walked up a driveway in Ridgemont Estates and tried the same trick on the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I didn't know, Cole said again. The same 3 words he'd said in the booking area. The same 3 words that would follow him for the rest of his life. I know you didn't, Lang said. That is precisely why this is happening to you with such perfect precision. We're amending the charges, Mr. Bennett. 16 counts of extortion under color of official right. Grand larceny, wire fraud, racketeering. She stood, gathering the folder. The maximum combined penalty is somewhere north of 100 years. The department will not be offering you a deal. Racketeering? Cole's voice cracked. That's a RICO charge. That's for the mob. You ran a criminal enterprise out of a patrol car for 4 years, Lang said simply, and knocked twice on the steel door for the guard. She paused before it opened, looking back at the man crumbling into his own orange sleeves. Director Sterling sends his regards. He said to tell you to check your pension plan. Because where you're going, you won't need it. The door closed behind her with a sound of absolute finality, and Cole Bennett was left alone with the full, crushing weight of exactly what he had built for himself. 7 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Charlotte was surrounded by news vans, 3 deep for 2 full blocks. The trial of former Officer Cole Bennett had become the kind of national story that makes anchors change their voice slightly when they say the words on air. A case study, cable news called it, in what happens when unchecked power meets a system finally willing to hold it accountable. Inside, the courtroom was hushed in the particular way that only comes from a room full of people who already know how this ends and are still holding their breath anyway. Cole Bennett sat at the defense table in a gray suit that had clearly been bought for someone 30 pounds heavier than the man wearing it now. 16 witnesses had already taken the stand over the proceeding. 4 days. A school teacher, 2 nurses, a delivery driver, a college student home for the summer. Each one describing, in eerily similar detail, being pulled over, threatened, and robbed by a man sworn to protect them. Then the prosecution called its final witness, and the room went entirely still, as Marcus Sterling walked down the center aisle in a charcoal suit, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. He did not look at Cole Bennett once. Director Sterling, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Michael Foster said, "Could you walk the jury through the morning of your arrest?" Marcus answered every question the way he had lived his entire career, without raising his voice, without a single wasted word, laying out the facts with the precision of a man who had spent 31 years turning chaos into evidence. The lack of probable cause, the immediate use of force, the refusal to verify his identity. The assumption that had done all of Cole Bennett's thinking for him before a single question was asked. "Did the defendant ever ask your name before placing you in handcuffs?" Foster asked. "He did not," Marcus said, his baritone carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. He looked at a black man, in old clothes, standing in front of an expensive house, and he decided he already had his answer. The defense did not cross-examine him. There was nothing left to ask. The jury returned in just under 3 hours. Guilty on deprivation of rights under color of law. Guilty on all 16 counts of extortion. Guilty on racketeering, on wire fraud, on grand larceny. Cole Bennett gripped the edge of the defense table, so hard his knuckles went white, and when the final count was read, he folded forward into his own hands as quiet gasps moved through the gallery behind him. Had Judge Eleanor Voss looked down from the bench with an expression that had no room left in it for sympathy. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "you were given a badge to protect people who could not protect themselves. Instead, you used it to run a criminal enterprise against the very citizens who trusted you, and when the one time your prejudice finally collided with someone who could fight back, you were caught, not because you changed, but because you finally picked the wrong target." She lifted her gavel. "It is the judgment of this court that you serve 52 years in a federal penitentiary without possibility of parole." The gavel came down like a gunshot. U.S. Marshals moved in, chains replacing the courtroom cuffs, and as they led him toward the side door, Cole Bennett looked back one last time. Marcus Sterling stood quietly in the front row, his expression unreadable, watching the machinery of justice finish what his own arrogance had started. 6 months after that, Sunday morning returned to Blackwood Lane the way it always had. Cut grass, a working sprinkler 2 doors down, the particular hush of a wealthy street on a summer morning. Marcus Sterling stood at the end of his driveway in a faded gray t-shirt and rubber sandals, coffee in hand, badge still folded in black velvet in his shirt pocket, exactly where it had always been. A patrol cruiser came down the street. New department leadership, new training protocols, a young officer at the wheel who slowed as he passed number 118, not out of suspicion, but simply to roll down his window. "Morning, Mr. Sterling," the officer called out. Beautiful day for the yard. It certainly is, Marcus said, and meant it, and for the first time in a long time. The quiet on that street felt entirely, uncomplicatedly peaceful. He'd spent his whole life believing that justice wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was 1,000 small corrections, made patiently, one broken system at a time. The badge in his pocket had never been about revenge. It had always been about making sure that the next time someone looked at a man in old clothes standing in front of a nice house, they'd ask a question before they reached for the cuffs. If this story moved you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognize someone in it, maybe even yourself, leave a comment and tell us. Have you ever watched something like this happen and had to decide, in that single second, whether to stay silent or speak up? We read every answer. And if you believe stories like this one matter, share it with someone who needs the reminder that no one is ever truly invisible.